Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hello, changemakers. Welcome to the DEX Show. I'm Tom McGraw. It's a solo episode from me today. I'm not suggesting you're stuck with me and my own insights for a half hour or so together. Have no fear. Merely that I am Timless and joined instead by two guests who are going to help us to explore the technical side of the hybrid workplace. Both of them, for better or worse, are Brits like me, but unlike me, they're both very well-regarded thought leaders in the whole realm of VDI, desktop virtualization, desktop as a service, DAS, and if I sound like I'm spewing out technical terminology without a clear sense of the difference between the terms, it's because I might just be, and that's one of the reasons that they're here. So let's get to it and to them, and welcome the first of our guests, Spencer Pitts. He's a digital workspace chief technologist at VMware. Spencer, we're delighted to have you with us. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. And interesting some of those acronyms and terminologies you were just spewing out, like you just said. So yeah, if maybe we get a chance in a second, we can talk about those. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
You did recognize them, right? I didn't get them wildly wrong or anything.
Well, I recognised them. It's a bit like that, and now I'm showing my age. You know, when they say that you're playing all the right letters, but in the wrong order. You know,
right. Well, yes, there's work to be done on my awareness here. I'm glad you're here. It's great to have you with us, Spencer.
It's a theme from a 70s show. Not that I'm saying that I'm of that ilk, by the way. I just remember the reruns, as the Americans would say. But anyway.
Got it. Well, start by insulting your host. It's a good way to begin. And let's welcome our other guest. Maybe he'll insult me as well. My colleague and fellow Nexthinker and former colleague and VMwarer of Spencer, Andy Philp. Andy, welcome to the DEX Show. Great to have you with us too.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'm used to Spencer. I was the host of a VMware podcast, and he would insult me all the time as well.
It's not quite true, Andy. Not quite true, but anyway.
I'll take it as a positive. Fantastic. Okay, guys, first things first, because we are going to explore the hybrid workplace in general a little bit today, as well as all of the acronyms and terms I misused earlier. But I'd like to begin with a general question. What have your return to office experiences been like in the course of the last 12 months or so? In fact, you always hear these cliches about, it was so wonderful to see everybody in the flesh again, and I'm a little bored of hearing them. So I want to start today with the bad side of going back to the office. So with you, first of all, Andy, putting all of that sort of lovey-dovey stuff to one side, what was the point where you thought, God, I remember this. Going to the office can be rubbish sometimes, can't it? What was it?
Yeah, I got a couple. Well, for me, it's public transport. So now that I work at Nexthink, going into London and being on trains and tubes, I think I did it once, and the way to mitigate that was pretty quick. I went straight back to walking. The Nexthink office is about a 25-minute walk from Waterloo, so straight back on that. Yeah. But that's kind of the more less serious one. The more serious one was just everyone's wearing masks, and London is one of these cities. It's a bit like New York, where no one looks at each other, no one's got the time of day, everyone's in a rush, everyone's got somewhere to be, no one makes eye contact, and it's just that's exacerbated by masks. And it just felt very impersonal. Getting to where you need to get to, even more than normal.
That's a good observation.
So I think that'd be that one for me.
That's a good point. And everybody is like super squeezed together as well, right? But in masks, it's quite funny. Like this.
And anxiety levels are just ratcheted up a little bit as well. So that doesn't sound too great. What about you, Spencer? Have you been into VMware's offices and had any experiences which were less than pleasurable?
Well, this is contrary to belief. I've actually only gone back to an office about 3 times so far. So I've done one speaking engagement where I actually had to somehow speak rather than behind a screen, and all of the lovely paraphernalia I've acquired over the last 18 months, I actually have to stand there. And that was weird. People have legs, apparently, which was interesting. Well, people I work with actually have legs was point number one. But for me, getting up on the train was actually quite nice in one weird way. So contrary to what Andy was saying, because a lot of people are still at home, actually, it felt like it wasn't so squeezed in on the tube, etc. But maybe that was just when I went back. But the worst experience, though, I think, is that sort of some people are at home and some people are in the office, and especially when you're doing 10 people round like a boardroom type with the the older camera up the top there, and then suddenly at the end of the meeting you forget that somebody else was on the call. So I think there's some elements.
And you've been slagging them off for a couple of minutes, and then you hear this kind of quiet cough into the speaker.
That's it. Oh, John's on the call still. Or, Fiona's still there. Oh, Fiona, you still there? We're just going to log off now.
We knew that all along, Fiona. We were just kidding. Okay.
But exactly. But and seriously though, I think that is a problem. Though, is that hybrid. It's all great when everybody's in one place. I think everybody made working at home work because we're all in the same boat, right? So we're all on the screen, and I think it's been a leveler. Everyone in the office to a degree, and if you think even way before the pandemic, it was almost a bit like, well, we don't really care about you if you're on a call, unless you were from a completely different, geography. Then you sort of said, okay. But if you were sort of in the same country and you didn't make it to the office, it was almost like, well, we don't really care about you because you're clearly not bothered because you didn't come to the office. There was almost like a bit of a two-tier thing going on there, right? That's how it used to feel anyway. And I think, over the pandemic, that's got better. Yeah. But I have to admit the quality and how you have to address multiple groups, so the people in front of you as well as people on the call, I found that particularly hard. And then being one of those people on the call when I couldn't make it in because my kids had to self-isolate and my wife. Yeah. And then being on the other end, if you know what I mean, I found that quite bad as well. But yes, other than the travel, I didn't think was too bad.
Great reflection on some of the challenges of the hybrid workplace there. Andy, you got any reflections on hybrid per se that differs from that?
Well, I think kind of in that I think of the most hybrid day was last week. Went into the office, and bumped into someone actually that used to work at VMware as well, totally by accident. So it was like one of those kind of, you always hear the water cooler moment, but that's where the office really comes alive, where you accidentally have a meeting and have a discussion. And off the back of that, now we're working on a number of projects together, a bunch of in-place meetings, a Teams call on, and that point, it was an empty train on the way home, and then home for a bunch of Zoom sessions. But really, if you think about it, and I know the same for Spencer, that's how I've worked for the last 20 years, really. So for me, hybrid is just the way I've worked normally. And the adjustment appears to be more for people that are always desk bound. But for me, it's really like, I kind of want to get back to that.
Got it. I mean, actually, you're talking of hybrid, right? I had got a mutual colleague and friend of Andy and myself, and she always has an ear to the ground about the right terminology to use, right? And apropos hybrid work, etc., she'd been to a conference all about which was full of CIOs, full of senior IT leaders and CIOs, all talking about the pressing topics of the day. And she came back and she said, look, everyone said they've heard enough about hybrid work. They're bored of it. They don't want to hear about it anymore. I said, oh my goodness, what are they talking about? She said, well, the agile workspace is very popular. I said, what's the agile workspace? She says it's hybrid work. It's exactly the same. It's just they've all moved on in their terminology. So I don't even know what we should call it or refer to specifically. But Spencer, when we talk about agile workspaces or hybrid work, let's break it down first of all. How do you define it? How do you differentiate it, for instance, from what Andy was saying he was working as before? What is new about it, and how will this evolve going forward?
So, yeah, there's a lot to digest on that one, but it's a good point because I've been hybrid all the time, but I didn't call it hybrid. I just called it work. So it was my baseline for what I considered work. I used to, before the pandemic, travel lots. So I'd spend a bit of time doing some email, catching up on the plane if I was on that or on the train. Not so much on the UK network because the shocking signal that was 3G or 4G or not, as the case may be. But I think for us, that was work. But to Andy's point, a lot of people that used to be in a physical workplace that suddenly had to go and relocate at home, for them, then coming back in after, not that we are really over the pandemic, as we know there's some new stuff coming out and whenever that might happen, but so it might be 2 days in the office, 3 days at home or whatever it might be there. So I think it's really around those typical desk-bound workers that were suddenly allowed to go and work at home. Conditions are forced on them, and now it's like looking back at it. So I think that's what it means from hybrid. But for other personas, and this is the interesting one, and Andy knows where I'm going to go with this one, I'm a big, passionate believer in VMware and the industry that we've been IT professionals have always looked after their traditional personas. And what I mean by that is the task worker. You go to typical IT teams, they've been looking after somebody that came to an office that probably sat behind a PC. And then sometimes we gave them PCs with handles and they went home with them, right? So early hybrid working or remote working. But they really just gave them the basic tools. Here's an operating system. I want to make sure it's patched, and here's some productivity tools. I'm going to call them rather than give the flavor of what they are. That's sort of what most IT departments have been doing for God knows how long. And then mobiles came along. And we sort of said, well, that's just an extension of a desktop, really, isn't it, from an IT perspective? So what do you need on there? Well, you need email, and you need productivity tools. But we all know things like PowerPoint, etc., don't really work, or Pages, depending on which flavor, again, trying to be agnostic. They don't really work on a mobile, do they, right? So, and I've been a big, firm believer it's horses for courses. And if that translates to you need the right thing in your hands at the right time, given what your function or your role is. So we don't talk about this for, say, people that never have a desk. We got customers that don't ever answer email because their only interaction with head office is because they're in a shop, as an example, and they're interacting through the EPOS system. So I think we've got to get into this hybrid work. What does that mean? We've been focusing mostly on the people that used to be in the office, which is normally a task worker. But if we take a step back, we should be looking at work. And really, it's not really hybrid, is it? It's the location can change at any time. So I'm kind of with this agile, which taking it all the way back to that. I quite like the word agile, although I know agile gets overused in industry as well. Things quick, fail fast is another one, right? That we keep using, or succeed quickly is one I particularly like. It's got a positive spin on it. Sure. But yeah, I think it shouldn't really matter what the location is anymore, and that's the change. We're always benchmarking back to how it used to be. We need this anchor point, and really, it's just, well, why should it matter where I am? I just need the right thing related to my job. And I used to make this analogy of I don't really want my nuclear missile submarine operator to be on a bring your own device at home. I kind of want them to be in the sub using the right tool that's specifically designed, and they can't do hybrid work, can they, right? They need to be there. So we just need to take a step back and think about all the different personas, and IT just traditionally look after the old ones, I think. It's kind of where I go with it.
Keep the analogy, Spencer. It's a powerful one. And Andy, any challenges you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this a lot, Spencer. But for me, again, and we see this a lot at Nexthink, is this idea that IT needs to stop looking inwards. We talk about that a lot, focusing on technology, and it's just if you take one of the things that onboarding new employees, technology becomes a component of that. But it's much wider. It's facilities, it's health and safety, it's HR, and it's how do you take someone in, welcome them into the business, make them feel welcomed, make them feel heard. And technology plays a part of that. So a lot of the change that we're seeing in hybrid work is IT now being forced to look outwards towards people rather than inwards towards tech. And I think hybrid, or whatever you want to call it, is one of the drivers for that. It's now a necessity. For IT to remain relevant, they have to work that way. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Before we get into hybrid then and its connection to virtualization, let's have a quick look over our shoulders at the pandemic remote work surge of a year and change ago. I've heard you say something very interesting before, Spencer, and that's the fact that if it wasn't for relatively recent advances in the whole area of virtualization, if I'm right with that term, the quite quick adaptation we saw across some very sensitive industries to remote work wouldn't have even been possible at another year at an earlier time. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. I think there's a bit of a perfect storm for things like VDI. And look, VDI, I'm not saying is the ultimate answer for everybody. To my point just a moment ago, I wouldn't expect my pizza delivery driver to come along with a VDI desktop through his Android phone, right? So there are better ways of delivering an application there. But for a lot of our customers, they are, they have this traditional installation base, if you want, of traditional Windows or desktop-related applications. Now, suddenly, when everything happened over the pandemic, the best way to do that was to get them to be served up remotely via a virtualization platform. Because everyone's remote now. You don't know where they are. You had to do something very quickly, but you need to ensure that they're secure. So VDI was perfect for that. But in the background, we'd been, to your point, we've been fixing some of the challenges. Things like the big one is Teams and Zoom, or pick your unified comms flavor of the month. Right? Everyone's got their own version. I've got all 19 billion of them that exist on my machine, depending on who I need to speak to, right? But my point there is that you go back 2-3 years ago, doing sort of unified comms, video conferencing, even audio to a degree, presence, desktop sharing together mode, or the new things that you had, that they weren't really possible in VDI. So actually, some of the things we've done recently to make sure that all your video conferencing experience is better, that happened, but also the cloud as well, right? So we've seen a massive advancement in people using hyperscalers to host their virtual desktops, because they've had application strategies that involve using those as well. You kind of combine all of those things, and then sadly the pandemic, and actually it made a perfect use case for, I need to scale quickly and get everybody working remote at home. VDI was sort of the first port of call. Now, I'm not saying it should be going forward all the time. I think as we start to settle down, I'm a firm believer that there isn't a one-size-fits-all. And I love IT, and I came from IT, and that was the notion that I subscribed to 20 years ago, when everyone should get the same thing. It should all be locked down because it makes my life simple, right? I don't think it should be like that now. But VDI was just perfect for the scenario we happened last year. But I still think it's perfect for certain personas. But to your point, a lot of advancements meant that actually it was ready for prime time, if you like. We always hear this term, year of VDI. Now, sadly, because of the what happened, it probably will be known as the year of VDI. I've even got a T-shirt. No, I think you and I wore one, Andy, from
we both got
old. It said "Back to the Future," and it had year of VDI, and it's got the old DeLorean on there. I should have sported it today, but it's probably somewhere in the back of my cupboard somewhere. But anyway, yeah, things have happened that mean it was a bit of a perfect storm, Thomas.
Lovely. And does this touch upon something you're often saying, Andy, which is that there's a profound misunderstanding about what VDI is still, and do you want to clear that up?
Yeah, and I think I think I'd agree everything with Spencer said. There was this massive influx for VDI and for desktop as a service, and for or infrastructure service, whatever you want to call it, because it was very simple. But I think the biggest misconception, and we see that with some of the organizations that we talk to, is that it's, I think as you alluded to, Spencer, before, it's just this kind of lift and shift. You take the physical environment and you just plonk it into a data center or a cloud, and there you go. You've now got your desktop, and it's secured, which is, I guess by default it is, but the reality is the way in which you have to compose these desktops and the applications, you have to kind of rethink it. So it's very much like one size doesn't fit all. Again, Spencer, you've said that already. And the only real way you need to clearly define what people need is to understand what they need, how they work, when they need it. And you need to know that before you can make decisions about whether you need to give someone a physical PC or a Mac, or a thin client and a VDI, or a session-based computing, or DAS, or all of the above. And it's going to be really interesting. I think a lot of decisions that were made especially around February, March 2020, I think a lot of organizations are going to have to go back now and rethink, especially as, and I'm saying this with hope in my heart, Thomas, that we start going back to a bit more normality and going more and more back to getting into offices, that whereas before VDI and DAS was a terrible solution for someone like myself and Spencer, because we were always on the road, when people start going back to that, those decisions need to be rethought and they're rebalanced. And the only real way to do that is to focus on the way people work, which kind of goes back to this theme we keep talking about, which is not starting with the tech and working out, but starting with the people and working back towards tech. So that's, of course, what digital employee experience is all about. So
exactly. And with that in mind, then, Andy, let's talk about digital employee experience, as we like to. On the one hand, it's never been more important, of course, whereas DEX was once an aspect of EX, it's now almost consumed employee experience into itself through Work's extreme agility, right? And what are the implications here? I mean, how does this impact the theme and topic of VDI?
It's really interesting, and I'll talk briefly because I know, Spencer, you want to talk about this as well, but I coming from one of the leading vendors in this space earlier in my career, is you would talk about standardization and orchestration, and we providing all the different options for customers. And then this idea of a great employee experience is this kind of last bullet point, which is an end result that just happens magically if you do all of this lovely stuff at the front. And the reality is that it's a massive chasm to jump. And you need to understand what the user is doing. You need to ask them, and you need to understand how they feel. And these are quite often nothing to do with measuring things like performance and things within a desktop. So I remember talking to a lot of teams where they're almost proud about how complex their environments are, right? It's, we've got this architecture in here and we stitch it all together, and we got, a hyperscaler over here and we've got some data center over here. But if you just think about it and take a step back, all of the employees, none of them care about how complex it is. They just want something that works, doesn't get in the way of their job, and enables them to do their best work. And I think that's really what digital employee experience is kind of driving. It's kind of focusing on what's really important, the end goal, which is not to have the most complex and amazing architecture, which is more of a geeky, self-congratulatory kind of view of the world, which is not really helping anyone. So, but I think, we talk about this all the time, Spencer, but maybe you can add something to that.
I think the thing that's changed is how people get KPI'd now, right? So you go back a long time ago and it was all about, I've got 99%, 9999, all the nines, as I used to say, uptime. And I know the value of everything, right? Or the price of everything, I should say, but not the value of the entire thing. And I think that's the thing that's changed now is IT were very much, you just need to get your techie stuff working. And then now I start to see people more KPI'd on the user experience piece as well. Now, it depends, again, what you mean by user experience. I go to different companies and different partners and different other vendors in this space as well, and everyone's got their own terminology. But I think that sort of, as you mentioned, Andy, that culmination of, you do need to understand what's going on. You need visibility to a degree, but you also need to marry that up with, like you said, user sentiment, etc., to get a sort of hybrid form. Now, interestingly, a lot of IT departments still have KPIs on the old way of doing things. So even though they get user experience as a bonus, the reason why it's a bonus to them is, it's not hitting their KPIs, whereas that might be in HR. HR are interested in those things. So then it comes down to, right, so IT is buying a solution, but they don't necessarily get all the benefit, apart from they've been told maybe by their CIO that they now need to make sure that the user experience is better. So it's an interesting sort of situation. I think you touched on it earlier, well, Andy, right? It's a lot more than just what you used to do. IT's remit's got a bit bigger, but there's other people in the family, in the team sport, as we call it. HR, facilities management are now involved. Like my story about that, unified comms and being almost like a second-class citizen. That's got an impact. That wouldn't normally sit with IT. Facilities management were doing comms and building stuff. And it suddenly got a lot harder. And how do you sort of understand all of that's going on together? I mean, that's the big change that needs to happen. It's not just an IT thing now. Other departments are interested.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that as well is that outward comms. I think the other value of digital employee experience is if you can get that kind of common language, it's a lot easier for IT to then communicate with the rest of the business. Because if you start going to the business and saying, the tickets went down, or the mean time to resolution reduced, or faults went down. I mean, someone in HR doesn't really care about that. So using a language that's more centered around digital employee experience will also help IT have that common sort of teamwork language which is needed. So it's another kind of benefit of kind of thinking of things differently.
That's fine for sending the reports upwards, which is kind of what you were alluding to. But you still need that first line support person has a problem, somebody's phoned up, they don't know where the issue is, and you need to be able to walk through and get it fixed. And that became a lot harder now. We're all hybrid as well, right? So having more tools to understand where the problem is, you can sort of see the trending and get that experience score, if you like, but you still need to be able to go deep and fix the problem for the person that's having an issue, right?
Yeah. And that's just getting harder and harder, the more complex and hybrid and heterogeneous and SaaS and cloud. And yes, so I think a big part of what we see, obviously at Nexthink, is finding the scope, impact, and context of issues is a massively important part of what IT has to do. And, not to take it off track, but all too often, I guess you'll agree with this, the VDI teams and the teams that are running those DAS desktops, they unfairly get the blame quite often right? So someone has a problem and it happens to be in a virtual desktop. Immediately, quite often, we see teams getting escalated to level 3 and engineering, and when in fact it could be something that could be scoped out and found at kind of level 1. It might be an application issue, nothing to do with virtual. So absolutely right. I think traversing that increased complexity is another big challenge that we see a lot of IT teams struggling with right now.
Great stuff. And when we look at the evolving workplace and we fast forward 5 years and we all assume we're going to see a lot more AR in the workspace, for instance, I mean, do you see this topic as something that's going to become especially relevant to that future rather than becoming antiquated? I mean, starting with you, Andy, where does this go in the next 5 years or so? VMware's got some good stories around that, and I have an Oculus Quest, and I've joined meetings and you do this kind of augmented reality. It's got some use cases and things like manufacturing right now, which is good, but I'm a little dubious about, or a little bit reticent to kind of, when you hear about the metaverse and all these kind of jacking into the matrix, and I think there are good use cases today for augmented and virtual reality, and it will become more prevalent, things like meetings. But again, maybe I'm just old, Spencer. I don't know how you feel about it, but I want to be outside and not plugged in. And I think I already spent my life on Zoom. I'm not sure I want to be in a augmented or virtual reality Zoom for 8 hours a day. You want to be in that conference
I don't
room.
Want that.
You want that full experience. Come on.
One of my favorite films is Wall-E, and I just look at that as the kind of future of mankind, and it kind of fills me with dread. So I think for me, there'll be a point where I'll resist technology, and that might be the line I went across. Okay. I'm not sure.
Spencer, you're going to give us a more optimistic future note here.
Fast forward 5 years, Andy's off grid. We don't know where he is. He's got a beard kind of like up in the hills.
Unabomber over here.
And my manifesto.
I kid. There are some people that I believe have actually taken that approach in, California and such like. But anyway, no, I think it's interesting in the AR VR one, because I think that is another one. We're very guilty in IT, and I feel like I'm apologizing for IT for the last 3 things I've opened with, but a new thing comes along and it's the answer to everything, right? And it will be the single thing we use. And again, I think it's horses for courses. There are definitely some roles where AR and VR make sense. Digital twin is the other one that you hear quite a bit at the moment. That's a term doing the rounds, and it's kind of like this, sentient thing, if you like. I'm going to stop short of sentient. I wouldn't quite call it that. I don't think AI has advanced that far yet, right? But it's something that can help you with your job. And it makes sense. Let's say you're a roadside breakdown assistant, right? You're not going to keep up to speed with all the latest things that you need to understand that you used to learn over experience as a mechanic or something. So how do you do that? You want the schematics of the engine overlaid. Perfect use case, right? And it doesn't have to be a big VR set. That can just be a mobile phone with the new AR, and some of the things in the Apple chips and that, where they can overlay and understand and then superimpose the schematics or the part you need to fix. So I think that's where it makes sense. But then it's that line, and the meeting room one's interesting. I still think there's a lot of work we need to do there based on what I said earlier, right? But yeah, I think going back a little bit around machine learning, that's the thing that I think's really made DEX, the whole industry, change. And also around things like zero trust. Some of these concepts were around before, but we didn't really have enough compute power to understand them. So whether you want to call it machine learning, or whether you just want to say there's a load more compute in the cloud that we can leverage now and chuck a load of compute at a problem and do some algorithms on it, right? Which is kind of where we are really with machine learning, if we're being totally frank. You now can get some interesting numbers out and statistics and some conclusions. You couldn't really do that 3-4 years ago. And I think that part's only going to get better and better. So I think the future is we're going to have more and more insights. Now, then the question is, what do we do with those, right? And that becomes that sort of more philosophical type argument, I guess. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I do want to unplug from the Matrix at some point every now and again, Andy. Although there is one new one coming out that I want to plug into very soon.
You're not going to go full John Connor like Andy is, so, that's the important thing.
I know Kung Fu.
Do I have his name right in the Terminator? Yeah, John Connor, right?
Yeah.
Well, Andy, come with me if you want to live. If you really want to live.
Yeah.
Right? Anyway.
Listen, Des, it's been great to speak to you both. I hope to have you both on again. But if anyone needs another hit from your insights sooner than that, check the show notes for a link to the DEX Show DEX Hub mothership, where you can find fantastic original articles from both of these gentlemen and from many other contributors too. Until then, we'll see you all in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how Nexthink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nexthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.